History remembers the Crusades as holy wars, but that's not how they felt. They felt like fire. Cities burning in the night, armies marching under crosses, but driven by fear, greed, and desperation. And somewhere along the way, a war meant to save the Holy Land became something far more dangerous. It became chaos. Because the truth is, the Crusades didn't just reshape the world, they broke it. The call that shook the world. In 1095, everything began with a single voice. At the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II called on Christians to take back Jerusalem. At that time, much of the former Christian world, including Palestine, Syria, and Egypt, was under Muslim control. To many in Europe, this wasn't just politics. It was loss. It was humiliation. And when the Pope spoke, he didn't offer strategy. He offered something far more powerful: forgiveness. He promised that anyone who fought in this war would have their sins erased. And that changed everything, because this wasn't just a war anymore. It became a gateway to heaven. The First Crusade, faith unleashed. The response was overwhelming. Tens of thousands joined: knights, farmers, priests, even people with no training, no weapons, no understanding of war. This wasn't an army, it was a movement. The First Crusade began in 1096, and against all expectations, it succeeded. By 1099, Crusaders captured Jerusalem, but victory didn't bring peace. It brought horror. Accounts describe mass killings inside the city, men, women, and children slaughtered without mercy. What was supposed to be a holy liberation became a massacre. And yet, instead of stopping the Crusades, it proved something terrifying: that faith could justify anything. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. The idea of holy war had been stained with blood. Victory no longer meant righteousness, it meant survival. And survival demanded even greater brutality. Because when belief replaces morality, limits disappear. And in Jerusalem, those limits were shattered forever. The illusion of purpose. At first, the Crusades seemed simple: take back the Holy Land, defend Christianity. But reality was never that clean, because behind the banners and prayers, there were other motivations: power, land, wealth. The Crusades opened trade routes between Europe and the Middle East, increasing economic opportunities. Merchants saw profit, nobles saw territory, kings saw influence. And the church, it saw control, because leading a unified religious war gave it power over all of Europe. So the Crusades continued, not because they had to, but because too many people benefited from them. And the longer they continued, the harder it became to stop. Because peace offered less reward than war ever did. Faith became a banner, but ambition carried the sword. The line between devotion and greed slowly disappeared, and what began as a sacred mission turned into a political machine, one that fed on conflict and thrived on endless war. Failure begins to spread. The Second Crusade was supposed to strengthen everything. Instead, it exposed the cracks. Launched after the fall of Edessa in 1144, it ended in failure. European armies couldn't even take Damascus. For the first time, the myth began to break, because if God had truly chosen them, why were they losing? Doubt crept in, and doubt is dangerous in a war built on belief. Whispers of failure spread across kingdoms and churches. People began to question what they once accepted without hesitation. Was this truly God's will, or human ambition in disguise? Leaders struggled to explain defeats that made no sense, because belief can inspire armies, but it cannot guarantee victory. And once doubt takes root, it grows faster than faith ever could. The Third Crusade, heroes and limits. Then came the Third Crusade, led by powerful rulers like Richard the Lionheart, facing one of history's most respected leaders, Saladin. This was different, strategic, disciplined, almost honorable. But even here, the Crusaders failed to retake Jerusalem. Instead, they negotiated. Pilgrims could visit the city, but it wasn't theirs. And that's when the truth became impossible to ignore. The Crusades were no longer achieving their purpose. Even the greatest leaders could not change the outcome. Because the problem was no longer strategy, it was reality itself. Jerusalem was no longer a prize that could simply be taken. It had become a symbol too complex, too contested, too fragile. And symbols are far harder to conquer than cities, because they live not on land, but in the hearts of millions. The moment everything collapsed. Then came the Fourth Crusade, and this is where everything falls apart. The plan was to attack Egypt. Instead, they turned on Constantinople, a Christian city, an ally. In 1204, Crusaders sacked it, looting, burning, and destroying one of the greatest cities in the world. Churches were desecrated, treasures stolen, civilians killed. This wasn't a mistake. This was a turning point. Because now, the Crusades weren't just against Muslims, they were against anyone. The very ideals that once united them were now shattered. Faith became an excuse for greed and destruction. Alliances crumbled under the weight of betrayal. The Crusaders had become the monsters they claimed to fight, and the world watched in shock as holy war devoured its own. The Fourth Crusade proved that when ambition rules faith, nothing is sacred anymore. When Crusades turn inward. After that, the word crusade lost its meaning. It could be used against anyone the church declared an enemy, even Christians. The Albigensian Crusade targeted a Christian sect in France. Entire populations were wiped out. The war wasn't about Jerusalem anymore. It was about control and fear, because now, no one was safe. The people who never should have fought. Then came something even more disturbing, the People's Crusade. Untrained civilians marched toward the Holy Land. Many were killed before they even arrived. And then, the Children's Crusade. In 1212, thousands of children set out believing God would protect them. Many never returned. Some died. Others were sold into slavery. This wasn't war anymore. This was chaos consuming the innocent. A war without control. The Crusades continued for nearly 200 years, from 1095 to 1291. At least 8 major crusades took place. Countless smaller ones followed. Some targeted Muslims, others targeted pagans, others targeted Christians. At some point, it stopped being one war. It became many, and none of them were truly connected anymore. The final collapse. By 1291, the last Crusader stronghold fell, the city of Acre. With its fall, Crusader rule in the Holy Land ended. After 2 centuries of fighting, they had lost everything. Jerusalem remained out of their control. The mission had failed. But the damage, that remained. The consequences no one could fix. The Crusades changed the world, not always in the way people expected. They increased trade between Europe and the East. They strengthened monarchies. They expanded knowledge. But they also created something else: division. The relationship between Christians and Muslims became defined by distrust, violence, memory. Even within Christianity, the damage was permanent. The sack of Constantinople deepened the split between Eastern and Western churches. Some wounds never healed. The most uncomfortable truth. Here's what history doesn't always say clearly. The Crusades didn't go wrong. They revealed something that was always there. Because when you combine faith, power, fear, ambition, you don't get peace, you get escalation. Each crusade made the next one easier to justify. Each victory made violence more acceptable. Until eventually, no one remembered why it started. Why this still matters. The Crusades are not just history, they are a warning. They show how quickly purpose can turn into chaos, how belief can be weaponized, how systems built on ideals can collapse into violence. Because the people who fought didn't think they were wrong. They believed they were right. And that's what makes it dangerous. If you made it this far, you didn't just watch history. You witnessed how one of the most powerful movements in human history lost control. Subscribe for more deep cinematic stories that reveal the truth behind history's greatest events. Like the video if this changed how you see the Crusades forever. And tell me in the comments, which dark chapter of history should we uncover next? Because history isn't peaceful, it isn't simple, and sometimes it turns into chaos.